No high-speed rail? We want our money back. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle now. And Bill, your own state of California's governor decided this past week that they were going to radically scale down former Governor Jerry Brown's pet project, that high-speed rail that was running from two cities I've never heard of, between one and the other, but the rest of America doesn't really care about where it was running. It was just trimmed in size. Almost immediately, President Trump tweeted out that the federal government wants the grant money back that it extended to California because they were working on a high-speed rail project.
This guy is awesome.
So we're talking about something between $2.5 and $3.5 billion. First of all, Bill, just in general principle, if you are paid to produce something and you don't produce it, what should happen?
You should be refunded. You should have to refund your money. That's always been our policy here at this little business, and we spend significantly less than $3 or $4 billion a year on Bill Whittle now.
No more than half that.
If anybody has a complaint about anything, we refund their money. Probably shouldn't have said that, but anyway, that's generally what we do. We take it very seriously. It's a core principle of our lives. It's not a business principle. It's just a fundamental principle of honesty. And this high-speed rail system is the biggest boondoggle that I've ever lived to see, certainly. And I get to pay for it here in California. All the money I've ever paid in taxes to the state of California, all the money that everybody I've ever known paid in taxes to the state of California. In fact, pretty much all the money that everybody I could see if I stood out on the 405 all day and watched the cars go by has gone to pay for this ridiculous prestige project. And I used to think it was a prestige project, then I realized with real clarity it's not that at all. This is a mechanism for buying votes. This is how business in the blue states run. We come up with some project that costs an unbelievable amount of money. We take it from the people who pay taxes into the state because it's a rich state. Used to be anyway. We're the poorest state in the union now. If you look at assets and deficits. What they do is they come up with this project and it's approved by referendum or something like that, and then some sum of $2 billion, $20 billion, $200 billion. Pretty soon it gets to be real money. And basically what happens is they spend this money on this project where they are buying, $10,000 toilets essentially. The money is going into the hands of their contractors and their picked people and their.
Well, Bill, I'm sure that there was a competitive bidding process where organized labor shops were not given any leg up or advantage.
No, absolutely no question about it. They absolutely did, and if it was Elon Musk talking about doing this, he'd do it at 500, 600, 700 miles an hour rather than 160 miles an hour. But so clearly the facetiousness of your question is the answer to the question. And so basically what it is, it's a way to take money from people who are producing things into the government, keeping a large portion of it for ourselves and our endless retirement benefits as public sector employees, passing the rest of the money down to construction companies and union workers, and then they build a little tiny piece of this gigantic railroad, and they have lifetime employment, and they get out and vote for Democrats so that they can complete the cycle in the process. And since the scaled down version, if you don't believe me, well, you're wrong. And the reason I can prove that you're wrong is because the entire idea was ridiculous on its face. We need to have a high-speed rail connection between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Well, if only there were some way to get from Los Angeles to San Francisco, not at 150 miles an hour, but I'm just dreaming now. I'm just, science fiction mode, maybe 500, 600 miles an hour. I don't know how many flights there are between LA and San Francisco on a given day, but I intend to find out. It's scores, if not hundreds, I would think. So it was never needed in the first place. It was sold to the California population as a prestige project in the sense that California liberals are extremely sensitive to what their moral and cultural superiors in France think. And France has high-speed rail, and Germany has high-speed rail, and Japan has high-speed rail, so we need high-speed rail. And the only problem here is that France and Germany and Japan is about the size of California, as I recall. we have an enormous country, and we cannot afford to go from one end of the country to the other at 160 miles an hour. The whole thing doesn't work in America. It works on the East Coast. There's an advanced train network on the East Coast. But the whole thing is you start looking for why we need it, and then you begin to realize the why we need it is not important. We need a high-speed rail system in California because we need to raise money for taxes so that we can keep that money. That's the reason you need a high-speed rail system. You don't particularly need to move farmers from Bakersfield to Modesto at 160 miles an hour rather than the 70 or 80 miles an hour that they would get when they're driving. And this leads us to an even more interesting point, which was raised by somebody I spoke to in the Central Valley. If you look at California, there's right down the middle is this gigantic Central Valley where there is enormous amounts of agriculture. And if you look at how those counties voted, they all voted red. And people have said, and I am well convinced that there is probable cause for this kind of argument. It's not just a loony conspiracy theory. Having watched the state of California choke off the water to those farmers, choke off any number of things, regulations, dams, they're doing everything they can to shut it down. And they're building this railroad. My understanding is they're kind of starting in the middle, isn't that convenient, right where all the farmers are. And they're going to take all their property and all their territory and expand it out used to be from LA to San Francisco. Now it's Modesto to Bakersfield or something. The whole thing is a criminal activity. And I'm trying to think of the best way really to describe this. Well, why don't you ask me another question?
What I wanted to do is, though, focus. I mean, it's in addition to the relative merits or demerits of the project.
There are no merits.
This whole idea of the federal government providing loans and grants to a project like this. By the way, the Trump administration, not only did President Trump said he wants the money back, but he said that they're looking at cutting off another $929 million that is supposed to be flowing to California. But think about it this way, Bill. California is huge. It's a big part of the United States. It is a powerful, rich state. And the people in that state put a lot of money into the federal coffers. Why shouldn't they get a little back? And frankly, Mr. Trump, President Trump, I'm sorry, we've already spent that money. How can we possibly give it back to you? It was ours in the first place, wasn't it, Bill? Wasn't it the California taxpayers?
Well, first of all, they never should have gotten it in the first place. If California decides they want to build a high-speed rail system that is a California rail system and it's independent of we don't have a real national rail system. We have Amtrak, which is actually a wonderful experience, but it is not a quick experience. So the money should never have come in the first place. I forget who it was. I think it might have been William F. Buckley. I'm not entirely sure, and I'm garbling the quote, but something to the effect of why people in farms in Iowa have to work to make a subway system for people who live in New York. I forget who the author of that quote is, and I've munched it up, but that's basically it. If California wants to have a high-speed rail system, and then California can pay for the high-speed rail system, they never should have gotten the money in the first place. But since they did, and since they didn't deliver, they should have to pay it back. It's not so hard to understand. We gave you this when you say, well, they gave it to us, it's ours. The federal government gave it to California in order to buy something which it shouldn't have been buying in the first place, but it nevertheless made that transaction.
But you just breezed over that part of the issue where it's money that Californians sent to Washington, D.C.
That's not how it works, Scott.
That's
not how it works.
It is. Let me explain this, because every state in the country, every county in the country, every locality in the country is trying to get back the money that we sent to Washington, D.C. And every one of them argues that if we don't get this back, somebody else is going to get it back. So why shouldn't we fight for it and get as much as we can?
Well, this is why we have a $25 trillion debt, and it's heading to $200 trillion, because people assume that the federal government is the way to do everything. The entire idea of a federation, the entire idea of the federal government, essentially, when you think about it, the way it's supposed to work is the people in the states make proportional tax contributions to the federal government that goes into a pool, and then the federal government ideally uses this money for the benefit of all states as needed, not so much as, well, we got this much out of California, we're giving this much back. And I object to California being called a very rich state. I really do. The fact that we think of ourselves as the richest state is the reason why we're the poorest state by any bookkeeping standard, if you look at the liabilities of California, we're the brokest state in the nation. We're the poorest state in the nation. And they're going to keep it that way. And I remember the point I was trying to make earlier, Scott, because having ridden just last week on Amtrak, which is another one of those kind of weird government-private hybrids like the Postal Service, my experience on Amtrak was delightful. It was absolutely wonderful. I came very, very late to this train travel thing, but I absolutely loved it. But during that time, we went from Van Nuys up to Salinas, and coming back out of Salinas, during the entire route all the way up, we would pass entire villages of tents and garbage, just mountains of trash with people living in it. But in Salinas, coming back south, there was an actual city of tents and homeless people and boxes and people living in boxes by the side of the railroad. And that's when it hit me, Scott. That's when it hit me. What Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom and all of these really wealthy coastline liberals want, and I've seen this in Oregon and I've seen it in Washington, what they want is they want a state where the only people that can afford to live there is them. That's what they want. They want all of the wretched hoi polloi shot out of this beautiful place of theirs so they can go back to Texas or Oklahoma or wherever they come from and vote for their red policies and their so-called freedom and all that. But what they want is they want a place where only they can afford to live. What else explanation could there be for Gavin Newsom's city of San Francisco having so much feces and needles on the streets that you have to have an app in order to find a way to walk around them? What actually drives that? If Gavin Newsom, as mayor of San Francisco, cared about the people of San Francisco, he would do something about this. But he doesn't. And the reason he doesn't is because he likes the fact that other people have to walk among the human waste and needles, and he doesn't. He likes that. This is the thing that has become American politics. It is no longer about a meritocracy, and it's no longer about limited government organs and limited bureaucracies that are accountable to the people. It is an aristocratic ruling class that has determined that this is the way for them to exert what they've always wanted, which is legal control over other people. They can't get it by birth, although they think they certainly deserve it. And so what they do is they go into politics so that they can have legal power over other people's lives. And these people used to be called aristocrats, and they used to be called nobility, and they used to be called priesthoods and czars and grand dukes and all the rest of it. And we started this country to get rid of these people. And we did a pretty admirable job of it. While we were building the country, when everybody had to pull their own weight, we did an admirable job of getting rid of these parasites. But now that the country is largely built, and by that I mean the level of individual wealth and the level of standard of living for average Americans is so high that now we no longer care. We just simply hand over the money to these criminals, and they provide this in order to cover their money laundering scheme. And it's I think it was in a book called Whatever Happened to Penny Candy by it's one of these Uncle Eric books. Very simple little book. You learn a lot of things in there, and he had a very small paragraph that made life very, very clear for me, and will probably make it clear for you too. And that is simply this: the government tells you that they need to raise taxes in order to provide services. Once you understand that the reason that the government provides some services is so that they can take the tax money. Once you understand that that's how it works, we are here to take your money. We will give you some services in exchange to cover this enforced theft, legal theft. But basically, once you finally get the horse in front of the cart, then all of a sudden politics makes sense, and especially California politics and this high-speed rail scheme.
Final question, and on that political aspect of things, Governor Newsom immediately came out and said, after President Trump tweeted about this, that it's a little less than a stunning coincidence that President Trump has voiced this opinion just after some 16 states, led in many ways by the Attorney General of California, have filed suit against the Trump administration over President Trump's declaration of a national emergency in order to fund his border wall. Bill, isn't this just a kind of petty sort of retribution act on the part of the White House?
Well, let's just ask an American citizen who might be watching this, which they think is the more appropriate use of federal funds. Do you think it's more appropriate for the federal government to spend money to defend the borders of the federal nation, to defend the borders of the United States? Do you think it's more appropriate for the federal government to protect the borders of the United States of America? Or do you think it's more appropriate for the federal government to take money raised from people all over the country and put it into a larceny scheme under the cover of a prestige program that's not needed in order to move farmers from Modesto to Bakersfield at 160 miles an hour? Which one of those seems to you to be the more appropriate use of federal funds?
Come to think of it, if he gets his $3.5 billion back, he'll have enough to build the wall.
Yeah, funny how that works. And by the way, the cost of the wall is absolutely ridiculous, and it's a joke. It's a joke. We spend $10 billion a day in this country. That's what the government spends, $10 billion a day. To hear that we're $3 billion short is just laughable. NASA, who's I used to have I still do. I have the NASA vector tattooed on my heart under my skin. Nevertheless, still spends the same amount of money in real dollars as it spent back when we were actually a space program, when we were flying 4 space shuttles up to space. We don't fly space shuttles anymore. We don't have a space program anymore. NASA has no way to get people from Earth to the International Space Station, which is in itself a boondoggle. Simply because it's not in the orbital plane that it could be of any use, we had to move it into an orbital plane so the Russians could get to it, so they could help pay for the thing, and then therefore made it useless. So this is the entire issue, Scott. The money to build the wall is not the issue, and I think it's just a big mistake for President Trump to be arguing that it's the money. He simply needs to come out and say, I am talking about the amount of money that the federal government will spend from midnight on January 1st until about, let's say maybe 10:30 in the morning on January 1st. That's the amount of money we need for the wall, for the whole wall, for the entire time it takes to build it. That's how much money we need, and this is to protect the country from armed invasion. And what's the defense budget now? $500 billion, somewhere in that general neighborhood, $500-600 billion. So this idea of we need another $3 billion to build the wall is it's insane. And he shouldn't be making this argument. For Trump to make an argument about the wall based on dollars is like making an argument about the right to keep and bear arms based on whether or not you should have a 10-round magazine or a 30-round magazine. That's not the issue. The issue is, does a 27-year-old teacher who's 5'1" and weighs 100 pounds soaking wet have the right to defend her life against armed assailants who have come to kill and rape her? Yes or no? And that's the answer to that question. The answer to this question is, does the country as a country, the United States of America, have a right to protect itself from armed foreign invasion? I say yes to this. And California says no to this because California's entire business model is to import people to vote for Democrats, provide them with minimal services that other people are paying for, put up with the crime and all the rest of this abandonment of the rule of law in order to maintain the power so that they can drive around in their limousines and avoid the human feces on the streets of the richest city in America that they have put there because of their own intentional political policies. Now, if you don't understand this, you haven't been paying attention.
5 days a week you get to enjoy Bill Whittle Now, thanks to the members of BillWhittle.com who've contributed voluntarily without any kind of federal grants or state money, contributed of their own means from their own hard work to make this possible. We're grateful to them. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members of BillWhittle.com for making this possible.